This morning's lesson I've titled Compromises Offered by Pharaoh. Now, of course, the story of the Exodus and how God, through the plagues upon Egypt, brought the Israelite people out of bondage, it's a well-known story. And it's one that I think we all learned from an early age in Bible class coming up. It's one that people, even unfamiliar with the Bible, even from a very much non-Christian background, they know bits and pieces of this story. They understand how God worked these wonders. And we know, too, that Pharaoh had a real back and forth with Moses and Aaron. And as you read through this account and the plagues upon Egypt, there were times through that process where Pharaoh said, okay, you can go. But then he changed his mind. He said, okay, leave now, get out of my sight. And then he changed his mind again. And even when they do finally leave, you remember the army is sent after them, chasing them. But what maybe you don't focus on so much in this story, apart from the normal back and forth and Pharaoh having a hard heart, he also offered several compromises. And this is where he's trying to get Moses and Aaron to weaken their position, to change in their devotion and their commitment to following through with God's commands. And I think as we look at the compromises offered by Pharaoh, we'll see a lot as far as a parallel towards Satan's attempts to compromise our Christianity today, so that we'll water down our morals or our devotion to Him, so that we will weaken our allegiance to the one true God. Now, where we're going to pick up in this story, the first compromise, it happens after the plagues have already begun. So, of course, the first plague to come upon Egypt, the water turned to blood, right? That's there in chapter 7. The second plague, as you start chapter 8, frogs come upon the land. There is a plague for the people. The third plague is lice. We read about that also in chapter 8. And then the fourth of the plagues upon Egypt is flies. And it's there at this scene with plague 4 where we see Pharaoh offer his first compromise to Moses and to the Hebrew people. Let's look at what's said here in the text. And you can note it here from Exodus 8, verse 25 on down to 27. It says, "Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, 'Go and sacrifice to your God in the land.' And Moses said, 'It is not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then will they not stone us? We will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as He will command us.'" Okay, so as we said, this is a bit into the story, the fourth plague now with flies, and Pharaoh offers a compromise to say, okay, you can offer sacrifice to Jehovah God, to Yahweh, but you have to do it in the land. Notice that there from verse 25, he says, "Go sacrifice to your God in the land." And we say this is a compromise, this is weakening their position, because God did not say, offer sacrifice to me while remaining in Egypt. He said, you need to go into the wilderness. You need to depart from the idolatrous Egyptians, from these pagan people, and go and serve me from a place of purity. That was God's command. And you can see Moses has understanding of that. In verse 27, Moses says, we will go 3 days' journey and sacrifice to the Lord our God. Notice the very last of 27, as He will command us. It should always be the desire of followers of God to do things as He has commanded. Not as we see fit, and certainly not as the world and Satan would offer us a compromised version, which is really nothing more than counterfeit Christianity. And so what is the compromise? If we boil it down and we put it in a phrase, what is Pharaoh really saying here? Well, the first compromise that he offers, he's saying, serve God, but don't leave the world. Of course, it was Egypt as the symbol of worldliness, of wickedness, and this is where Satan's tripping up a lot of Christians today. Where Satan says, yeah, you can serve God, you can have your proclaimed devotion to Him, Christians in name only, but you need to still be involved in worldliness. You need to be a friend to the world and a friend to God. And of course, there's no such thing. If you make yourself a friend of the world, you set yourself at opposition with God. And so this first compromise has really tripped up a lot of people. If we understand the teaching of the Bible rightly, we can't stay in the world. We can't keep our conduct, our behavior, like all the wickedness around us. We are called to be separate. You can see this from a lot of places, but let's note Ephesians 5 and verse 11. And if you remember in our Wednesday night study, this is part of a section that emphasizes walking in light. Christians must walk in light. And verse 11 says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. And I think this is a great reminder to us. Society today, and really our enemy Satan, has no problem with Christians being charitable and keeping their mouths shut about doctrine. And really, that's where society wants people in the church, right? That's where society wants Christians. You just do your good deeds and be quiet about my sin, be quiet about my bad lifestyle. You just help people and keep your mouth shut. That's not what we're called to do. And if they were sacrificing to God, remaining in Egypt, they are staying in fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. If we today try and serve God and still be a friend to the world, loyal to the world, not exposing the evil that's around us, we are serving God from a compromised position. And that's not true righteousness. I like the way we can find this in Romans chapter 6. First, the opening of that chapter, and then a verse a little bit further down. So Romans 6 opens with these words, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? And the answer is in verse 2, certainly not, or God forbid. How shall we who died to sin live any longer in it? And remember, Egypt, that's there as a symbol of sin, staying amongst Pharaoh and staying amongst all the false gods that the Egyptians would pay homage to. Well, you've got to come out of that. If we are dead to sin, dead to the world, we don't live there any longer. Our conduct is entirely different. Verse 11, likewise you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus our Lord. And I think we should see something here implied in the text. You cannot be alive to God and alive to the world and to sin at the same time. I have to choose to be dead to sin, to crucify the old man, that's 6:6 right in the middle here, in order to be alive to God. That's why we share in the death of Christ in baptism. That's in this chapter as well, to be planted together in the likeness of His death, to be raised as a new creation. And so this first compromise, to serve God but to remain in the world, we have to reject that. Now what's interesting as we come back to our text in Exodus, the second compromise that Pharaoh offers is really not all that different. It's still in chapter 8, just a little bit further down. After Moses rejects that idea, he says, we've got to leave Egypt. Here's what Pharaoh says, 8:28. Pharaoh said, I will let you go that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you shall not go very far. And then he closes, intercede for me, which of course means intercede that the flies could be removed. You remember this is fourth plague territory here. Intercede that the flies would be removed from the land. But look at the compromise. Don't go very far from the land. And of course, this is where Satan would love to have the church in a corner. To say, okay, you can be different, but don't be different enough. Don't really be called out. Don't really be holy. And if we try and put this in a phrase, what this compromise really means, well, Pharaoh's saying, serve God, but don't be very different. And in today's world, be a Christian, but don't be too different from a non-Christian. And we have a lot of people who are influenced by peer pressure, by the world around them, or they're going to claim devotion to Christ, but anytime it calls them to change and be different from the people around them, then they're going to compromise their Christianity. They're going to compromise their morality, and they're going to say, well, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be seen as odd. I don't want to be seen as weird. I still want to fit in. And this desire to be loyal to Christ but still fit in with the world, it is a self-defeating prospect. We are called out of the world. So how can you blend in with that which you are called out of, to be different from? This is an idea you see over and over in the Scripture. And so not just that you would not expose the darkness around you, but that you would actually try and conform to it, try and fit in with it. And there's several passages we could note, but let me draw your attention here to 2 Corinthians 6. Verse 14 kind of reminds us of where we came from. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. What fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And then in 2 Corinthians 6:17, we have a quotation taken from Old Testament Scripture. Now listen to these words very carefully. This is 2 Corinthians 6:17. Therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. Okay, come out from among them and be separate. This isn't take one step over that boundary line outside of Egypt. No, this is that 3 days journey into the wilderness. This is the willingness to follow God, to fulfill His commands, even if it means I have to be wholly different, incredibly different, even if I have to be seen as odd and strange and out of place. And in fact, that's what we should expect. The quotation here comes from Isaiah 52. And if you look to the text there and take the time to study it out, I like the imperative commands Isaiah gives, speaking for God. He says, "Depart, depart, get out from there." Sin is evil. Sin is abhorrent to God, not just because it's transgression of His law. It brings pain and chaos to our life and to the lives of our loved ones. If we can see sin for what it is, how could we have any other reaction? Pharaoh says, don't go very far. Well, we're talking about something that is corruption, something that is evil, something that brings death. I'm not trying to stay close to death. I want to go far from spiritual death. And that's the idea we see over and over in the Scripture. As far as trying to fit in goes, let me show you a great Scripture to speak to this. 1 Peter 4, verse 3 and 4. And occasionally, as I'm trying to find Scriptures that I'm calling to mind, maybe you have this issue too, I'll think of it in King James, and I'm looking for it in New King James, so I have to change the search on my eSword on the computer. This is one of those. We'll talk about that after I read it. 1 Peter 4, 3 and 4. For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Notice verse 4. In regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. Okay, now that phrase at the end in verse 4, you don't run with them in the same flood of dissipation. This is what gave me trouble when I was looking for the verse, because the way I remember it, you don't run with them to the same excessive riot. That's King James. But look here at what Peter's teaching. We have spent enough time in sinful conduct. We've come out of that in order to be Christians. And so we have to leave, and yes, leave entirely, and yes, go far from our past wicked lifestyle. And the world will not thank us for it. The world will think us strange, will think of us as odd, and will even persecute us for deciding to be different from them. But what does holy mean? What does sanctified mean? Set apart. That's what God has done. We can't be set apart and still conduct ourselves just like the world. And think about how wide-reaching the application is here. Just looking to the words here, it's pretty easy to tie it into drinking and dancing. Of course, that's in view here in the text. And when a Christian tries to be loyal to Christ and still conduct themselves in these sinful things, it's going to create a problem. We'll think about things like the prom. Think about things like cheerleading outfits that by and large are not modest and are not things Christians should involve themselves in. Are we willing to come out from among them and be separate? Are we willing to be thought of as strange for the sake of holiness? What about the TV shows that you and I enjoy? What about the movies that we decide to watch or to go see in the theaters and support? Are we doing these things because we want to blend in with the world, because we want to be like them? Or is our decision-making based on holiness and a desire to continue to live set apart, separate, and called out? Our decision-making day by day is about getting closer to God or further away from Him. And when we're trying to blend into the world, guess which way we're going? Further away from God. So Pharaoh offered this compromise. He said, don't go very far. Well, we as Christians who have understanding, we need to say, I'm willing to be very strange, very odd, very far from the world, because that's where God is. God is very far from the world, far from sin. He is there as a picture of holiness. And since our God is holy and we're loyal to Him, we must live holy lifestyles. So we're called out of that. Okay, now let's go to compromise number 3. This goes a little bit further in our story in the Exodus. This is in Exodus chapter 10. And so where we left off in chapter 8, we had just had the plague of the flies. That's 4th plague. 5th plague is the disease on the livestock. That's chapter 9. 6th plague is boils. That's also chapter 9. And then hail upon Egypt. That's at the end of chapter 9. And then as you come into chapter 10, Moses and Aaron tell Pharaoh that there are going to be locusts that come and cover the land. Now they're just telling about this plague. It hasn't happened yet when Pharaoh offers this 3rd compromise. Okay, look at the text. Exodus 10, there in verse 8. So Moses and Aaron were brought in again to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve the Lord your God, and who are the ones that are going?" And Moses says, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds we will go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord." Verse 10, then he said to them, "The Lord had better be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord, for that is what you desired." And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Okay, now it's not caught in so many words, but as you read this context, you can see what the compromise really is. When Pharaoh says, "Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord," he is excluding what Moses has already said about bringing their young and their old, bringing their sons and their daughters. He's talking about the children specifically. And this is going to be Pharaoh's collateral, if you will. It's going to be his bargaining chip. You can go worship God. You can go as far away as you want from Egypt, but we're keeping your children here as a guarantee that they'll come back. Now here you can see the compromise, and it's not hard to make application to the Christian life today. What Pharaoh's saying is serve God, but don't include your whole family. And it's a sad thing. We have a lot of people who are serving in the church today who don't take an active interest in spiritual education for the next generation. And this is seen in the immediate family, right? That parents would raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But isn't this also seen in the church family? That our older members would take an interest in the young and coming up, in the children, and that people would sacrifice their time and energy to do things like teach Bible class, to do things like host a youth night in their home. Why would this happen? Well, because you're interested in these young people. You're investing in them. You're desiring that the next generation in the church will be stronger than the current one. And that will never happen by accident. And so Pharaoh's compromise here is really a pretty devilish one. Serve God, but forget about your children. Serve God, but don't include the whole family. And of course, Moses has already answered this. He said, "We will go with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and our daughters." He is making a strong point here that serving God is something we do together, all of us. We're not forgetting future generations. We're not neglecting spiritual education. And this is something that God has stressed to his people over and over in every age. I like so much the picture that you get as you look to this in Deuteronomy 6. And this is a good reminder for all of us. Deuteronomy 6, start at verse 6 and go to 9. This, by the way, is one of those easy-to-remember ones, 6:6. If you go to Deuteronomy 6:6, you'll find this section. "And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates." Okay, now the first thing I want to do is relate this passage back to what we saw in 1 Peter. You remember the world, they think it's strange that you don't run with them to the same excessive riot. Well, let me use that language and challenge you. Would the children, would the young people in your life think it's strange if you started talking to them about God? Would they say, "Hey, you never talk about spiritual things. You never talk about Bible stuff"? Would that be odd to them? Or would they say, "Well, that's kind of what I expect from you. That's fitting. That's what I've learned." There are people where God is so a part of their life, the Bible is so a part of their life, that it would seem strange if they weren't trying to relay some spiritual message just in daily activities. And you can find opportunities for this all over the place. Look again at the imagery here in this text. Teach them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. What's the application there? All the time. And it doesn't matter if life is busy, you can teach while you're busy doing life, while you're running errands, while you're going to the grocery store, while you're driving on trips. You can use that opportunity to increase spiritual knowledge, to be about the work of growing righteousness. We want to be a spiritual benefit to the next generation. That's the concept all over the place. Look at verse 8. "Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them be as frontlets between your eyes. Write them on the doorpost of your house," to fill your life with God and His Word. And if we're true Christians, if we're loyal to God, if we wear that name, if we're truly ambassadors of Christ, wouldn't we expect this? That our life would be filled with spiritual things? And that people couldn't really be associated with us without seeing that. It would be obvious because we're so involved in it. When someone loves to play golf, it doesn't take long to see that they're a golfer. When someone loves to fish, it doesn't take long to see that they love to fish. If we are a people who love God, who love His Word, why does it sometimes come as a surprise to people? Why do people not expect it? Are we trying to keep God a little bit further back in our life? Are we trying to serve Him but not think about future generations, not think about our whole family? Use the opportunities that you've been blessed with. Of course, we could mention here Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. That doesn't happen by accident. Just this past weekend, we were down at Southwest at Arise. That's their lectures or spiritual growth workshop. And one of the men who was bringing a lesson there, he was talking about the concept of outproducing. And he related it first to the world of cattle. As you're raising cattle, you look at a cow and a bull, and if they produce something greater than that bull, you say, hey, he outproduced himself. We've now increased. We now have a bigger, stronger animal than the previous generation. Well, the church needs to outproduce itself. We need the young children today, when they grow up, to be stronger, to be closer to God, to be greater spiritually than the present, current generation. And that is our desire, to leave a better church than what we found when we came into it, right? To increase the kingdom. If that's our desire, are we showing it by our actions? Now, one more on this point here. In 1 Thessalonians 2, you find Paul use the picture of a father and a child to talk about his care for the church and his relationship with him. And this is another good reminder for us that this compromise, it doesn't just have to do with the blood family, your blood children there in the nuclear family. It has to do with all the young people that the church has any opportunity to influence, to affect. 1 Thessalonians 2, look at 10 through 12. Paul says, "You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father does his own children, that you should walk worthy of God who calls you into His own kingdom and glory." First, when you look at verse 12, this ought to be the desire of every Christian for those younger than them, that they would walk worthy of God. That they would be entering into the kingdom that God calls them into, right? To live according to His glory, to honor Him with all they have. Verse 10, he speaks at how they were able to see how He conducted Himself. He said, you've seen it, God's seen it, that we conducted ourselves in a way that is devout, that is just, that is blameless, that is, we were trying to live the Christian life, the same one that we were promoting to you. Young people, I think, can see hypocrisy, can see emptiness, can see vain religion, perhaps better than most who are grown, most adults. And parents, if you're talking to your kids and being fake about your spirituality, they will see in a minute, you're saying this, Dad, but I know the way you make decisions. I saw what you did last week. That has nothing to do with loyalty to God and to the Bible. And so they are looking, make sure what they see is someone who is honestly seeking God, so that you can say, I have done my best and I want you to do even better, like we talked about. Now notice verse 11 right here in the middle. As you know how we exhorted, comforted, and charged every one of you. Okay, now Pharaoh in his compromise, he says, forget about him. But God's word says you need to do these three things: exhort, comfort, and charge. What does that mean? Well, to exhort, that's where you call to one side so that you can instruct them, so that you can build them up, so that you can give them the words they need to be spiritually strong. To comfort them, that's where you offer that word of consolation, to speak to them and to give them that pick-me-up when they're in the lows of life, when they hit a failure or when they have a point of depression. And then finally, the charge, that's where you send them out understanding God is faithful. This is where you bear witness to them that God's promises are trustworthy. He says there will be punishment for disobedience, there will be blessings for obedience, for righteousness. And we need to instill that in future generations so that they live walking worthy of God, trusting in the message of the Bible. That's a charge for every one of us. So don't compromise. Don't forget about future generations. Okay, now number 4, as we come back to Exodus, there is one final compromise that Pharaoh offers. And we already saw it alluded to in Moses' statement. So we're back in Exodus 10. Again, he's told about the locust. The locust came, and then the plague of darkness came. The only plague left is that final one, the death of the firstborn. And it's right before that Pharaoh makes his last effort. So this is Exodus 10, 24 to 26. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, "Go serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you." But Moses said, "You must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God, and even we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there." Okay, notice how Pharaoh has given a lot of concessions here. You remember where he started, he said, serve God in the land. Well, now he said you can leave the land, and then he tried to say, don't go far. Now he says you can go far, and then he tried to say, don't take your children. Well, now he says also, let your little ones go with you. So he's made a lot of concessions, but what is his last effort? You notice it right there. He says, only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. He says, don't take your animals with you. Now, as we said, Moses has already answered this, because when he was trying to say only the men can go, he said, no, we're going with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds. So Moses has already showed his level of commitment to fulfilling God's command. But Pharaoh still tries. He says, let your flocks and herds be kept back. I like Moses' answer. He says we've got to have these animals to serve God with. And of course, you see that tie in with sacrifices there. But look at the phrasing there in 26. Not a hoof shall be left behind. Don't you like that phrasing? Not a hoof can remain. When we show our commitment to God, to serving Him with our all, I want us to have that sort of attitude. Not a hoof is going to go for selfish purposes. Not a hoof is going to go toward wickedness, toward the desires of Satan. Not a bit. It must all go towards God. And so if we take this example of the animals, of the livestock, how do we put this in a phrase for our application, this last compromise? Well, Pharaoh says, serve God, but don't honor Him with your possessions. That's what he's saying when he says keep the cattle back, keep the flocks and the herds back. He's saying you can go, you can serve God, but don't honor God with your stuff. I love the word stuff anytime we talk about possessions, materialism, because I feel like it shows it for the cheapness that it is. It's just stuff. We know, of course, the promise of the Scripture that we don't take it with us, that this stuff and all the elements that make up the earth, they will be melted with fervent heat. And so don't try so hard to hold on to this stuff, to try and make it eternal or to invest in it all your focus, all your time and your energy. Don't be obsessed with what is temporary. Be obsessed with what is eternal. This idea of honoring God with your possessions, there's a great lesson in Luke 12, his account of the gospel. He records the parable of the rich fool. Now, down at the end of this parable, we see the actions of the rich man. Of course, he's going to tear down his barns and build greater. Verse 19, I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. We can already recognize that phrase as one spoken out of foolishness. And that's how God answers. Verse 20, God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? And I love so much the lesson recorded here at the end in verse 21. So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Every one of us has to take a hard look in the mirror. Am I being rich toward God? Or am I trying to keep my livestock in Egypt? Am I honoring God with my possessions, or am I keeping my flocks and my herds back and separate from God? And as you start to explore a little bit deeper this idea of honoring God with your stuff, you'll find that really it's in many ways related to trust, to reliance on God. Let me show you in the Old Testament, Proverbs chapter 3, a section here beginning 5. This, of course, is part of one of those father-to-son speeches that characterize the early chapters of this book. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Notice verse 9 as a special emphasis. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the firstfruits of all your increase. Do we honor God, show that he has value with our possessions? The way that you spend your money, the way you put your emphasis on certain things and activities, it shows your heart. It shows where your desire is, shows where your head's at, shows your attitude. Does ours show a devotion to God, a trust in him, or does it show reliance on self and a desire to be independent and self-sustaining? Now, there's certainly something to be said for trying to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, so to speak, but not a one of us can be spiritually self-sustaining. We all fail trying to be independent spiritually. We must rely on God. And look at how verse 9, honor the Lord with your possessions, is connected in the text with all these ideas. Verse 5, trust in the Lord. Rely on him to give you the things that are needful, the things that have eternal spiritual benefit. From verse 6, he will direct your paths. We're not trying to chart our own course that leads to our personal fortune. We're going in the path that God has given us that leads to laying up treasures in heaven, not treasures here on this earth. From verse 7, fear the Lord and depart from evil. I can be guaranteed I'm not going towards evil if I'm walking on God's path. If I'm trying to chart my own course, I could very well be going the wrong way. Look there at verse 8. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. It is a benefit to us. It is for our good that we would be giving, that we would be charitable, that we would honor God with our possessions. So don't listen to Pharaoh and his compromises. You go serve God, but leave your flocks and herds here. We have an obligation. We have a responsibility to give to our God. And can't we all just stop and appreciate all that we have comes from him? All that we have is the good that God has given us. And so we've been blessed with this from our Creator. Are we going to use it as a blessing to his kingdom? Or are we going to bury it in the ground? Or maybe spend it selfishly on our own desires? And so here from Exodus, you can see compromises offered by Pharaoh to Moses and Aaron and to the Hebrew people. But in each one of these, you see a greater lesson for Christians today, for our desire to serve God and trying to wage this warfare between the spiritual and the physical. Pharaoh said, serve God, but don't leave Egypt. Well, we as Christians have to leave the world. We have to come apart and be separate. He modified that a little bit. He said, don't go very far from Egypt. Well, no, we need to serve God and be very different, even to be thought strange because of our devotion to higher principles and not to self, not to worldliness. He said, let the men go, keep your children behind. Well, no, we must serve God with the whole family. We will not forget future generations. We will do our best to outproduce ourselves spiritually. And then finally, he said, don't take your cattle. Well, no, we're going to honor God with our possessions, with all that we have. We're not keeping back selfishly, trying to deny God what came from him and what is rightfully his. We honor God with our all. And what you can see in this list, what you have are cheapened versions of service. If I serve God, but remain in the world, a friend to the world, don't teach future generations, and don't give God my stuff, am I really serving him? Absolutely not. True service requires all of this. And consider how it affects my service to God. If I'm trying to build up the brotherhood, but I'm not fully invested in the church, don't you know those efforts will fall flat? If I'm trying to evangelize from a compromised position where I'm living just as worldly as the non-Christian, that's a failed effort. And that failure shouldn't surprise us when we're trying to serve God in that compromised way. There's a reason we're called to be separate, called out of the world, to live like Christ, not to live as Satan would have us to do in our own selfish desires. If you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, I pray that you would become one. You know the only thing that can remove sin is the blood of Jesus Christ. And then you give your life over to him entirely. In obedience to the gospel, you're lowered in the watery grave of baptism where we contact that blood, and you rise as a new creature with new priorities, ready to serve him. And if you're a Christian who's been serving for a time, Maybe you see in this where you've compromised. Maybe you see in this where you've stayed in Egypt, where you've gone after the ways of the world. God is rich in mercy. He desires to forgive, and we desire to work alongside you. If there's any way that we can assist, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.